a great turnout. I'd like to, first of all, thank everybody for coming and joining us today and to celebrate the amazing life and legacy of my life partner, best friend, and mentor, Hank Harrison. We couldn't have made it without your generosity and support. And I want to give a special shout out to Cindy Long and members of Plow for their undying support. Thank you. Hank would be very happy to see so many of his friends here, and I know he would want you to be sad. He knew his time was up, and he was ready to go. Over the last few months, he'd often tell me he felt he was near the end, and not to worry. I'd always reply, hey, nonsense, the docs say you have another 10 years at least. And at the same time, knowing he was right, as he always was. Hank loved life, he loved living, but most of all, he loved writing. And his writings are still alive, some published and still selling, and others still to be published, but we're working on that. He left a letter to be read today to all of you. He originally wrote it in 1983, and he updated it in 2011, signing off on it in true editorial fashion. After I'm done reading the letter, I'm going to hand over to Lance Armstrong, one of Hank's closest friends and fellow authors. He's going to give you his take on Hank's life. After that, I hope some of you will also have some anecdotes to share. And please don't forget to add your names to the comments in the memorial book. And then please stay for some yummy treats supplied by Da Vinci's Deli Tessin in Lodi. I need the letter. There's the letter. Small details, right? Too busy chatting, chit-chatting. Hey, we couldn't have it going off without at least one glitch, could we? That would never do. All right. The preamble to the letter, he wanted his cremated remains to be scattered in 3 different sections. One in Parkwood in Somerset, near Glastonbury, England, which is the heart of the Glastonbury Zodiac. The other in Newgrange in Ireland, and the other one at Partington Bridge near Big Sur, California. We have, I want to thank Judith Leach, an English artist and author, and Carolyn Burke of Tipperary, Ireland, for being there for Hank and helping carry out the last wishes at Glastonbury and Newgrange. He didn't want any special funeral arrangements and no words to God of any kind. And he goes on to say, if there's enough money remaining, have a good old-fashioned clock party with a live band and invite whosoever thought I was worth a damn. And I do want to say to anybody that happens to be religious here, while he maintained a detachment from, and in some cases an aversion to, organized religion, he was a very spiritual being. In fact, it was evident in his everyday dealings with fellow earth dwellers. And then we get to the letter proper. I discovered great truths, but was not able to express them as well as I would have liked. The brain is born with great potential, and life is the sand that grinds it away. Anything I left behind for posterity, words, letters, books, collections, were meant to elevate man from the depression that comes from knowing that life is merely an experiment, that it has no meaning outside of the meaning we ascribe to it. Each of us leans on the next of us, and the human at the end stands alone. realized that I was the end, the final domino in some chain. There is no good outside of the God man has created. The ultimate art product of any given civilization is its concept of God. No one has yet evolved to the point where they could see it for what it really is. Nothing. Vast, infinite matter and space without time. Time does not exist outside of man's imagination. It is an illusion. Death, therefore, is merely no thing. I achieved Satori quite by accident at the age of 17. The second Satori was at the age of 22. In college, when I realized this truth about time, the madness of it. I tried to tell people about it, but it turned out to be so gothic, so abstract that I realized I was alone. After taking LSD in 1964, I had 4 Satoris, and I did not live in a state of bliss, except in the summer of 1962, for about 4 months. I wandered and wandered across America in a state of samadhi, fully enlightened and fully realized, an American, not practicing yoga, not a guru, nothing but me, facing the non-thingness of the world, facing the godlessness of the universe, full on in the face, and not hating, loving openly, and being kind as I went. My lamp went out. I lived in a world of lamp snuffers who made it a practice to structure the social patterns against this kind of enlightenment. I fell to the earth. Kennedy was shot the next season. It was a dark time. I never recovered. I never stopped trying to regain the light, but as I grew older, no one would accept the scars and twists the fall had made. I fit no mold. I refused to be a rishi or a guru or anybody's Zen master, although I was for thousands of people who didn't know my name. This was my great joy, doing it anonymously. If you believe in an afterlife, that is your problem. But if there is an afterlife, and I am wrong about these things, then I will be smiling. No, actually laughing, a cosmic laugh. Love to you all. Thank you. Thanks. You're up. Did I mess up?
The modern day 3x flashlights. I got that.
Let's see.
No.
Oops. Oh, there he is. There he is.
There he is.
Ah, come on. There you go.
Look at all of you here who have come together from many places near and far, and just for Hank. Hank would have hated to miss this event. A man who would seldom shy away from a good party, an adventure, a celebration where he could be the center of attention. Those of us who knew Hank Harrison well knew him as a man who enjoyed those moments in the spotlight to hold a sermon. The grand oratorical philosopher, spokesman of ideologies, past adventures, big, small, rare, weird, or however it might be explained. More simplified, Hank was a storyteller. But not just a storyteller of other people's stories. No, Hank was an adventurer of life, a sort of Renaissance man who found his way into the center of many circles and activities and movements. And he lived to tell about it, until he did. And because of his photographic memory, his story has endured through the years with much detail. Like most of you in this room, I have my own personal connection to Hank. And in most cases, I have pleasantly listened to many of his stories. And how rude of me not to personally introduce myself. My name is Lance Armstrong. Yeah, I know. So just like Hank, who was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on June 17, 1940, as George Harry Harrison III, or simplified, George Harrison. We share a similar identity crisis in the world of nomenclature. I being Lance Armstrong, and he being George Harrison. For the record, I am not a globally famous cyclist, nor was Hank ever a member of the Beatles. So no wonder he went by Hank. At any rate, I digress. Being a published author myself, I had the fortunate experience one day of Hank stopping by one of my book signings. I was already familiar with Hank, his books, other trivia about him, and I knew he lived in the area. And I also knew a lot of people who knew, like a tongue twister. I also knew a lot of the people who he knew. But the forces had not yet brought us together that day. After spending some time talking to Hank about our books, being authors and writing in general, Hank wrote down his phone number and said, call me, or call me dude, or however he said it. Over time, he and I would develop a strong friendship and mutual respect as writers. He once told me, Lance, us writers got to stick together. Certainly, Hank was involved in many things in his life, but I would learn that his academic work and his writing were his greatest passions. As a constant scribe, Hank wrote about many things in his very diverse and adventurous life, which included living in several countries, managing the Warlocks, which would become the Grateful Dead, and in 1966, founding and serving as the Field Service Director of the LSD Rescue, the nation's first 24-hour telephone drug intervention center. In 1968, Hank won a scholarship to the Rocky Mountain Writers Conference at the University of Colorado, where he was greatly influenced by the man with the golden arm author, Nelson Aldrich. And Hank worked as a writer in residence at the Montalvo Art Center in Saratoga, California in 1972. Hank additionally won a 6-month journalism residency, during which time he served as the features editor of the Las Vegas Sun. He was also a contributor to the Georgia Straight newspaper in Vancouver, British Columbia. Without going into detail, Hank contributed to various other newspapers, magazines, and journals. And Hank also appeared on a few documentaries and was a guest on various radio and TV programs, including shows hosted by Geraldo Rivera, Maury Povich, Ed Opperman, and Catherine Schreier. In association with his work as an author, in 1978, Hank established his own publishing company, Archives Press. That company continues to operate today. It was also in the late 70s that he had the honor of working in London with the prominent English historian of ideas and culture, Dame Frances Yates. After returning from a stint in Europe, Hank accepted a position as the editor of Dr. Dobbs Journal, a computer technology magazine in Menlo Park, California. Hank wrote nonfiction, fiction, and poetry. The diversity of Hank's books mirrored the diversity of his life in general. Take this book, for instance. A book on hang gliding and the quest for flight by Hank Harrison. Although this is one of his least known books, it is a great example of his diversity as a person. He penned this book in the late 70s after taking up the sport, which is symbolically much like his life. In an analytical sense, Hank lived his life with a sort of hang gliding approach as the adventurer, explorer, observer, and of course a traveler who likes seeing new things and soaring to new places. But somehow in his latter years, Hank placed his feet firmly on the ground right here in Galt, Sacramento County, California. Shortly before he died, I was visiting with Hank and his beloved life partner, Trina Watson, who is also a fine writer. We were discussing literature and aspirations as writers. Hank suddenly looked at me and asked, "What the hell are we doing in Galt?" Now, Galt's a nice little place, but it's certainly never been confused with such literary capitals as Paris, London, New York, or San Francisco. Hank also wrote books on medieval Arthurian literature. He had a fascination with the topic of the Holy Grail. And there was his first-hand accounts of the Grateful Dead and the Haight-Ashbury scene of the 1960s. He was undoubtedly a significant part of that counterculture scene, and he knew and associated with many well-known figures of that era. He was once the roommate of Grateful Dead bassist Bill Lesh, and Hank recently got excited when I told him that I had known Alan Cohen, who was editor of the San Francisco Oracle, the 1960s bullhorn underground newspaper of the Haight-Ashbury. One of his best friends of that era was Grateful Dead frontman Ron Pigpen McKernan, who sadly died at the age of 27 in 1973. Hank enjoyed telling the story about how he dated Janis Joplin by way of his relationship with Pigpen. And on a side note, Janis also died at the age of 27, about 2.5 years prior to Pigpen's death. They were unfortunately both members of what is known as the 27 Club. I remember storyteller Hank telling me how Pigpen had set up a date with Janis to go to the movies. And then when Pigpen suddenly couldn't make that date, he talked Hank into being her date. Hank picked up Janis at the famous 1090 Page Street Victorian in San Francisco, took her to the movies, and then dropped her back off at the old Victorian. He said that it would be the last time he would ever see Janis in person. While psychedelic drugs played a large role in the 1960s hippie scene, if you haven't heard, Hank was the guy setting up the LSD rescue and co-writing the 1967 anti-LSD abuse educational film, LSD 25. David Crosby of the band Crosby, Stills and Nash once said of Hank, "Harrison was no hippie drug addict or pothead burnout. He always looked clean. In fact, he was a trained shrink." And by the way, Hank did earn a master's degree in psychology from San Francisco State University before studying with community activist and political theorist Sal Alinsky at the Industrial Areas Foundation in Chicago. And Crosby went on to say about Hank, the first time I ever saw him, he was wearing a seersucker jacket and a bow tie and was carrying an attaché case. I could venture a guess that Harrison was a CIA operative or a Sal Alinsky graduate in charge of organizing bands. Helping people goes well beyond Hank's LSD rescue days. He built a life of assisting others. He made a habit of helping people as well as animals who were down on their luck. They were all Hank's rescues. Hank definitely had a soft spot for homeless people. That there are plenty of stories about him letting people in that situation stay in his home to help them better their lives. Although Hank assisted a lot of people who were experiencing homelessness, things didn't always go as planned, especially when hard drugs were involved. He had his house raided, placed under surveillance, and his Mercedes 240D stolen by an ex-employee with a trunk full of heroin. Now that certainly puts a different meaning to the term junk in the trunk. And by the way, that wasn't Hank's heroin. Although Hank played a role in Grateful Dead history, his interest in music extended well beyond the old psychedelic tunes and a lot of music that is known today as classic rock. He had very eclectic taste in music, jazz, classical, and of course rock. He enjoyed the German composer Karl Orff's Carmina Burana, and one of his favorite rock songs was The Who's Eminence Front. You remember that Who song with the hypnotic line, it's an eminence front, it's an eminence front, it's put on an eminence front, an eminence front, it's put on, and so forth. So Hank, he also had a family. He was born George Harry Harrison II. He was born to George Harry Harrison II and Edith Harrison. His parents would eventually divorce, and he later had a stepfather, Bernard Protein. One interesting factoid about Hank's father is that he was actually an Olympic athlete. He participated in the 1936 Summer Olympics as a member of the U.S. gymnastics team. Hank also excelled as an athlete. He was a backstroke champion on his high school swimming team in Hayward, California, one of the places where he grew up. Hank came to Monterey, California from Pittsburgh when he was 6 years old. Hank had one sister and 3 half-brothers, and his sister, Kathy Reback, is actually with us in the audience today. Following 2 marriages of his own, Hank spent the last half of his life with Trina, who he met while he was living in Ireland. Man, that woman loved Hank. While at San Francisco State, Hank met a beautiful young lady who would eventually have his only son, Peter Oxner. As the story goes, her father forbade them to marry and whisked her away right after Peter was born and put him up for adoption. Peter and Hank recently reunited after decades of separation, and they were fortunate to grow close. Not only did Hank regain his son, he also gained 4 grandchildren. While I was talking to Peter a few months ago, he summarized his biological father as a wonderful guy, very creative, very unique, kind of an aging, new age hippie type that found the beauty and the creativity in a lot of other people. Let me stop right there and say, that last line really hit me. I repeat Peter's words that Hank found the beauty and the creativity in a lot of other people. To me, that line really summarizes a lot about Hank. He had a keen interest in people and the ability to find the qualities in others. And he often enjoyed highlighting those qualities. If Hank liked you, he liked you. And he would even brag about your qualities with the sort of pride that kind of said, I'm glad to know you, and let me celebrate you. Hank definitely was not shy about expressing his approvals or disapprovals and his likes and dislikes in general. He enjoyed sharing his beliefs and opinions, and he welcomed opportunities for a good debate on a wide variety of topics. Now back to Hank's family. Of course, Hank, through his second wife, Linda Reese Carroll, had a daughter named Courtney, who the world came to know as Courtney Love, lead vocalist of the alternative grunge rock band Hole. Courtney was also known as the former wife of Kurt Cobain, who was the front man of another alternative grunge rock band, Nirvana, and sadly also a member of the 27 Club. A strained relationship between Hank and Courtney was followed by an estrangement, and one of Hank's often stated greatest regrets, not having the opportunity to meet his granddaughter, Frances Bean Cobain. As for Kurt, who died in 1994, Hank thought he was a genius, a sort of troubadour. And he liked a lot of his music. He really thought Kurt's work would endure and possibly develop more into the writing side in the realm of someone like John Lennon. It was a pity that Hank never got to meet Kurt and maybe reconcile with Courtney and spend time with his granddaughter. Perhaps in the end, they all lost. I recently asked David Eyes, a friend of Hank since 1977, to describe Hank in a nutshell. He nailed it, as he said that Hank was a larger-than-life character with a dominant personality that made him kind of a love him or hate him guy for a lot of people. David added, for whatever reason, I just wound up loving him. We in this room share that love, David. As the program for this event mentions, Hank would have turned 82 years old yesterday. But although he is no longer physically with us, in many ways, he remains very much alive. But when you gave so much life, are you really ever dead? That's what you call a legacy. And you certainly made a positive impact in many ways, Hank. Your life was one well lived, and we were fortunate and honored to be a part of it. Thank you, Hank.
Thank you, Vince. All right, who's next? Don't be shy, David. Don't you have something to say?
Sorry to be interrupted with grabbing this. I'm having a low blood sugar moment. If I pass out, you'll know why. Well, as Hank might have said, quoting from his beloved Apple 16 computer manual, there's no getting started. but I will try and start, and I'm glad that we, this is quite a rare Hank Harrison book, but it's a great example of how he would always work into pretty much almost anything that he would write, something that related to man's eternal quest, which is maybe summarized into writings and interest in the Grail. He would take you back in a book about hand gliding back to Leonardo da Vinci, for example. And when I think about Hank, I can go back in time and think of him as a troubadour, as a bard, writer, and also as a court jester. He loved his humor, and he was also not above tweaking the powers that be, whoever they might be. And you might wind up being the representative of that one at one time or another. I first met Hank 45 years ago down in San Francisco. Somehow we wound up having a life course that kept intersecting in a lot of ways. I was involved in book publishing. I was interested in sort of the spiritual path, which is how we met at the American Booksellers Association convention. I think he was scouting a publisher for what ultimately becomes Grail Books, or Grail Trilogy. But we wound up having an intersect in publishing. Again, this book is funny in that the publisher of this book wound up being my boss at one point, much later, and so we were able to compare notes and joke about it. And then he had way before I did, had an involvement in computer technology. When he moved out here, that became an area of intersect. Again, he would write about computers. He had, again, he applied his sarcasm to some of the other writers on the scene, which he would parody as Rich Fate or Burlap Sacks. You have to be in technology to get these in jokes, I guess. I know at least one guy here. I got to meet a lot of the folks. Well, he introduced me to so many people from many different worlds. I want to say about his daughter, Courtney. You know, when I first met him and he was working in Las Vegas, I said, oh yeah, and I've got this daughter who was maybe 12 at the time or something, Courtney. And all these years I just know, yeah, Hank's got a daughter somewhere, Courtney. And then as I used to come out from the East Coast to work in the growing computer business, I would meet and hang out with Hank. And he took me up once into the city to see his daughter, who was living there. This was before Kurt and everything. And what he wanted to do was take her to the supermarket. And like any dad would with like a college kid or a kid just out on their own for the first time, he wanted to take her to the supermarket and buy a couple of bags of food to put in her kitchen, so you know, could have something. So I always knew that Hank had the right fatherly feeling for Courtney, and it always pained me that following the course of fame that she did, that wound up leading to, you know, kind of a irreconcilable death scene. They were actually quite a pair, cut from the same cloth, and that may have been the undoing of that relationship. Maybe there's only room for one of them in the room. But anyway, enough about that. Hank was so generous in sharing his life. He had an amazingly rich and full life, which I'm so grateful he was able to share with me. I was able to cross paths with him in New York City, San Francisco, Dublin, Ireland. He hosted my first wife and I for a week in his amazing stone cottage in County Meath. took us to his beloved Passage Praise in Newgrange and stuff, and showed me the material that became the content of his books, like The Cauldron and Grail. You know, he lived near us down when he was down in Los Altos, moved up here to Sacramento area involved, and distance kind of prevailed, and I wasn't able to see him as much. But I did connect with him when he had a stroke. I was able to come visit, and I'm just so glad to have Hank in my life. I don't know what else I can say, but he just shared a ton of a very big, rich life with me, and I'm very grateful. I'll also mention his birthday and my dad's birthday is the same, so that was always another strange karmic resonance that we have. Trina, that's all I can say.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, he would share, you know, he would host me. If I remember when I first met you, he was crashing at Frenchie's.
Oh, God,
And,
please.
but then I would come and crash with him crashing at Frenchie's. So anyway, it was great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Okay, anybody else? Yeah, sure.
Hi, can everybody hear me? I don't know. Well, my name is Boots. I used to be with the Grateful Dead, and that is where
My name's
I
Greg
first
Mann.
met Hank.
And I knew Hank played in both our lives. I see a lot of old hippies around. And always encouraging. And I can tell that the vibe that developed in those days is still there. I can feel it. I personally believe that Jolene and my association with Hank and Trina was not just a happenstance kind of thing. Something somewhere bigger than all of us got us together. And what happened was that Jolene is a horse girl from way back, and she decided, you know, since she retired teaching, to go back to riding horses again. And she took lessons at Trina's stable, and Trina, recognizing talent, put her to work on some of the other horses she had. And so in between lessons and riding, she would also work with the horses. She also got to know this jolly gentleman who would hang out on the front porch from time to time, turned out to be husband, Hank Harrison. And he told some stories, you know, that if you'd have heard them from anybody else, you'd have said, boy, this guy really is full. But we checked it out. That wonderful thing called Google. It turned out he was telling the truth. These were all true. And so we were, at the time, we were having these little jams at our house. We get together with musicians and other people that were artsy-fartsy types. And, you know, just kind of sit there and play and have a good time and have a kind of elder party. It wasn't as wild as they used to be, but we had a good time. And Jolene said, well, I'd like to invite Hank and Randy to Trina. And I said, they're never going to come to our little party. We're not from Gulf. We're from the big town of Elks Grove. That was where we lived. And I thought, well, they're never going to come here. But they did. And in spite of the fact that he knew nobody there, those of you who know Hank know that that didn't bother him a bit. He got to know everybody there. And everybody got to know him. He read a couple things from the rest of us would play music or do something else. He'd read from his latest book. And it was just a fantastic addition to our little things there. And then then he, times got tough, as they do sometimes, and then he moved from Wilton, right, Wilton, to golf. But I also found out that he wrote a lot of books, and I bought all of them I could get a hold of, read them all, and some of them several times. And this guy's a really great writer. Well, I happen to have literary ambitions myself, and I wrote a book that, I self-published it, and it was no big deal. But Hank said, well, how come you didn't ask me what I thought about it? I said, well, Hank, you're a big-time author. You're not going to want to read some manuscript from, some... Hey, we're friends. I wanted to read your manuscript. So the next book I wrote, I did ask him to read my manuscript. And he looked it over and gave me some pointers that, as far as I could see, made the whole thing a really readable book. And he gave me some insights and some pointers. He never told me how to write it. He never told me what to do. But he gave me some blurbs and some pointers that I could use to make the whole thing into a much better book. We were out at his 70th birthday. Were any of you there? It was 12 years ago. But we played. We got together with another friend of ours, G.P. Bailey, who was going to play today, but he was in the hospital. He just got out and couldn't make it. But we got together and played some Grateful Dead tunes, some old rock and roll tunes and everything, and just a real pickup thing. But it was a great time. But then when he had his stroke, he was in the outpatient place pretty close to where we live. I went to visit him, and naturally, he was full of stories. But he did tell me one little thing when Lance was talking about how his father was in the Olympic team. He added a little bit more to it, and he said, "My father, this is Hank talking. When my father was in the Olympic team, he went around when Hitler took everybody around and showed them, all the brand new, wonderful world he was building." He said, so my dad came back, went to Pennsylvania, into the Pennsylvania Dutch country, found the blondest, blue-eyed gal he could find and married her. He says, I was supposed to be that wonderkin from the wonderful new Nordic world. Well, and but the thing is that, Hank didn't grow up with a marvelous, he grew up with a regular childhood like anybody else. There were some problems, and yet he overcame all that, and I think he became a very, like you said, larger than life. He was, and a really fantastic spiritual person. And I don't want to argue with Hank on anything, but I think that we really are all together, and we will meet again in one way or another. We can't explain it. Anybody who says he can explain it is not paying attention to what's going on. So it's huge, but I do believe we're all part of it, and I think that this is one reason why I'm glad to be together today. To remember that we are all part of this thing. It started out in the 60s and maybe died out, but it didn't die out. It's still here with us now, and we can still carry that on. So, right now, I'm very, very grateful and happy to know Hank Harris. And again, a lot of coincidences, way too many. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Anybody else?
It's real warm.
Mike, you want to come on? Don't be shy.
Well, yeah, I love Hank. I think he was like a father to me, and I was like a son to him. Met him over the Grateful Dead. Had the 72 Torino with a Still Your Face sticker on it. He was at the gas station. we saw the sticker on it. We had Penny, Corgi, a couple of the other, his children, his kids. So, he says, you like the Grateful Dead? I go, yeah. A little bit tattoo on my back. I'm the Grateful Dead. He goes, I'm Hank Harrison. I said, so, what? He goes, you don't know who I am, and you like the Grateful Dead. I said, yeah, but I guess like a Colonel Parker. I don't, you know. But in many ways, that was kind of Hank's thing. Everybody got a payday. Everybody kind of got famous in the world. And I hope he knows that he was rich. He was rich in love with you, with his animals. Yeah, he's in gold, but he had a roof over his head, and a horse off Jahan Branch, and he had me, and he had you. He had all this. Hank was a wheeler dealer. This is what's kind of funny because that was his podcast, and he loved my herb. He didn't smoke much, once in a while, but he'd hand it out to everybody, get deals done. You know, this for that. Hey, when you mow the lawn, and give you the, you know. But he was a very insightful person. We were different in many ways, but we would sit and talk. After the stroke, I remember when he was up in E.C. Davis. That was, I said, Hank, this place is horrible. I mean, it was clean and immaculate, but it was just, I said, I get a weird, I don't like being here because I gotta get out of here. I hope you never have to go to this place again. And then when he was at the place in Gulf, or what was that, the rehabilitation after a stroke, I'd go there every day because he was just down the road from me, so I'd go hang out with him, look at the Filipino nurses and all that, and sit and talk. He loved to talk, you know. I think he was disappointed in some man. It's kind of a MAGA guy. And he was like, what are you doing, kid? You know, but he didn't care. We'd sit and talk. And he was actually very conservative in many aspects. But, glad I got to know him. I think it's been 10 plus years or so, and we bonded over dogs. And, you know, that's one of the greatest things ever, is dogs, is cats, and you. You know, he was rich, and I being a father of 3, I could imagine being detached from my kid the way he was, but in some ways they didn't give him a break. They never had any, you know, like I said when my brother, 7 years younger, didn't go to my dad's funeral. I'm not even my dad. My father, this was his biological son. They didn't go, and me and my twin brother were his biological, but my dad, back in the 60s, took care of my mom and raised us up and all that. So, I just hope Hank knows that sometimes family, those people are in your life, not your blood, flesh family, because they never were around. They never helped. You were there. I was there, and all these, you know, like Bear and all these other kooky guys, they were nutbags, you know, and that was always a side of Hank, you know. There was a side that he liked to will and deal. His mind was always, he was an Ivy League guy that liked to kind of have fun and get things done with characters. You're like, who the heck is, you know, but Hank loved everybody. He took everybody in, and sometimes it might cost him a little, but in many ways he made lots of friends. And I hope he knows that we love him. I hope he knows that money's nothing. And I think in a weird way, he wished he had it. You know, and maybe been a little more famous, but I don't think in the end, I hope he knows none of that matters. It's all fool's gold. What matters is your family, your friends, your pets. I know he's with Penny and Corgi. But yeah, your love for horses and his love for his dogs and cats. He was a wonderful man. I think of him as a father. And a son. We just sit and talk. And that's what I love so much about him. It's just talking.
All right. All righty. Anybody else?
All right, I'm trying to think back. I know I'm not Hank through treatment. And I want to start first by saying you made a comment that we're all here for a reason, and that's how we met Hank, and I believe that. Nobody else believes he's here. So, but I met Trina at the horse, and God, I had my kids before my kids were born. So it had to be, my kids are 22 now, they're identical twins, and he loves them like family. And so we met before they were born. I'm trying to get at least 3-4 years before, because I went back into the horse industry and I wanted to start my business again. I have an equestrian degree, so I also have a business and marketing degree. So I said, hey, Trina, you wanna qualify a trainer from way back in the way of the Pacific Horse Center? I'll get back in shape, and then maybe I'll teach for you and all that stuff. So I started that way, and that's how I initially met him. And then he told me about his connection with the dead, which was really interesting, because one of my best friends was like a dead fan. It was not a concert. So she would laugh when I would talk about him. And he became dad to my girls in some senses of the word, as far as his heart. He was always, just anytime the girl, at first they were afraid of him because he was, he's big, right? So he'd come around, get over here, just come here right now. And I remember, right? You can remember Hank, right? He would just take him by their wing, but he's like a big teddy bear. And he would grab my girls to come to their side. And like I said, they're identical twins. So he would have trouble, I remember, figuring out who was who. And he'd tell them to separate here. And then when they got to know him, so big and burly, they enjoyed coming to visit and see what, Hank would have to say next, And of course, the boxer, one of his favorite, I remember his dogs and his cats and goats and everything else. And we used to follow them because they would go from different locations and figure out where they were next, so that the girls could come and see them and ride. Because that was one big connection Trina and I had, is I did not have a barn or stables, but I rode with others. And so it was an opportunity, kind of a win-win for both of us. And I'd bring the girls so that they could ride. And then that was my excuse so I could visit with them, which is what we used to do. So anytime we would ride, we'd come over, finish our ride, put the horses away. In fact, I remember, I think he was out with Dozen, which was this little tiny, for those of you that remember, this tiny little miniature horse, right? And it was with them that they learned to ride for the first time. And when they went in the arena, I think he came out afterwards with my daughter in tears. I can't quite remember. I know you were there, or close to it. Actually, no, I told you about it afterwards. Was their first ride by themselves, and all I can remember is my daughter riding at 3 years old, getting on the back, a little stubborn, and the little horse, the little pony going to it. And then my goddaughter went to it. And then Hank trying to hold her and care for her afterwards and give her big hugs. So it's okay. You're gonna get back up again, And then he would ride you had a horse for him. I remember that, and I remember only once seeing him get on horseback. But I remember him being so comfortable with the girls. His comments to me were always, we were family. To come visit anytime, horse or no horse, ride or no ride. And the girls really remember him as a figure that encouraged them, and that we literally followed him everywhere. And they remember them as a family of where our adventures began, if you will, and who he is. And then I would always sit with him afterwards. And whatever place we were, either in the trailer or the house, and we went everywhere, Fall, Wilton, you name it, we followed, and hear his amazing stories and incredible mind. I mean, just his mind to me was just incredible. I didn't even know until you said that he had a master's, but I know that it was spinning constantly, and he was always like thinking ahead and ahead of us as the words were coming out. So I remember nothing but fond memories of Hank and everything he did for us and how he treated us. So that's kind of my little story with myself and my identical twin girls who are now 22 years old. Thank you. Alrighty. Anybody else? Yeah. Oh, poor Sarah.
My name is Sarah, and I met Hank, gosh, I think I was 17 at the time. I was working for a little post office there, and I used to sort mail, and whenever I got to his box, it was always like these letters about the Grateful Dead or drawings on it, or something to do with Grateful Dead. Of course, that was huge dead at the time. Whose box is this? I wanted to know so bad. And then I remember he came in to get his mail, and he was so loud and just this huge, just like larger than life idea. That's the way to describe it. He had a Doctor Who scarf on, this really long scarf and hat. I think he had Bill and Amber, or Amber.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had Bill and Amber with him. So here comes this man. I mean, he just looks famous as far as I was concerned, you know. Saw the Grateful Dead boss, saw the man. Oh yeah, this guy's somebody. And he ended up stealing me and I had worked for him. So that was a no-brainer. It took me all of maybe 2 or 3 times coming in there and said, "Come work for me," and I went to work for him. So and when I showed up, I was his best employee at the time. But yeah, we had a great relationship. I would have to say it, and of course Katrina as well. And his dog Pitbull back then is what it was. Brenda was Amber and Bill's child, I think.
Amber and Bill, the
Yeah.
first two, yeah.
And then Brenda was a product. Yeah, I fell in love with Brenda. Brenda used to come with me everywhere. She used to hop in the car with me. I would take her when I was, errands for Hank, that sort of thing. And he just actually introduced me into Pitbull love, and I fallen for it, and I have one today. It looks a little bit like Bill, actually. Yeah, he did have a love for animals. He was great with them. He's just an amazing man. What else can I remember about his stories? I did have the opportunity to go to San Francisco with him to meet up with Portland once. We took him to go to Slim, I think she was playing at with Hole. I thought Hole. But anyway, that's my personal opinion of the band. I didn't care for him much. But we got there, and he was at the back door, and I think Courtney didn't like me very much. She didn't want me and my coach Shannon coming in because the team went in. He and my girlfriend was that very similar. He was very rude, if I remember correctly, but that was my brief little meeting of Courtney. But Hank got to go, and Hank got to be with her, and they actually got along that evening, and things were okay. They didn't know each other super well, of course, but they did get that moment together, and I was happy to be there for that. And recently, I had the opportunity, well, not so recently, but to introduce him to my daughter. So that was really nice. I'm very, very glad they both got to meet him. He has some kind of father figure to me as well. He's guided me through much of my life, through troubles and I mean, he's wonderful with advice, and I think I heard somebody say he doesn't tell you what to do, but he certainly leads you in the right direction, and that's what I loved about him. If he didn't say, "This is what you need to do," but he would kind of in a whimsical way say, "Well, my experience would be, this is offered." His truth, and his truth was, I mean, it was very good. He's incredibly intelligent. I found over the years, incredibly intelligent man, and I would go to him because of that in a lot of situations. And I'm not talking just intelligence with the books reading and his literature and all that, but his life knowledge, his people knowledge, his character, knowing character. Incredible.
nobody else wants to talk, maybe we should, start working on the, goodies over there.
I'll just say real quick, because of Hank, I am part of the pit bull rescuer family now.
Yeah,
So
oh, you
we've had
are, yeah.
many pit bulls, flea dogs, we just got 2 kittens yesterday. So he tried to give me a dog once, but my parents